Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Let's continue with part 3 on topic 4, selection control structures. In the previous parts, we have looked at the different types of control structures, operators that covered the equality and relational operators, logical operators, truth tables, and the precedence order of those operators. We have also learned on how to write one-way selection, which is the use of if, and the expression if-else, the two-way selection, and the use of braces to contain block of statement. In this part, we will look at nested if statement, which is having if statement within the if statement, and also multiple selections, which is having multiple if-else within if or within the else. Previously, we have looked at when we have if statement and then if-else. Let's remind ourselves what those are again before we go deeper into multiple selection, as it is important that we know how to use if and if-else. Say that we have this program that we need to write. Write a program that prompts the user to enter a number. Display the number if it is even. Using the if statement, we can have if number modulus 2 equal to 0. Here, whatever the user typed from the keyboard, if the remainder is 0, it is an even number. Say that the user enter 128. 128 modulus 2 gives us 0. So, using the equality 0 equal to 0 gives us the value true. Remember that the equality operator has two values, either true or false. If it is true, the statement within the if block will be executed, which in this code, it will display 128 is an even number. Also here, I use curly brackets even though we only have one statement. It is not needed, but it doesn't matter if I want to have it here. Now, using the same question, say that we want to display number is an odd number if the user enters, for example, the value 3. In the if previously, when the user entered the value 3, it will not do anything because the condition of number modulus 2 equal to 0 is false. In the if-else statement, if the expression is false, it will execute the statement in the else block. If we run this code and enter 3, it will display 3 is an odd number. What if the user enters the value 0? Is it an even or odd number? It will display 0 is an even number. This is because when 0 modulus 2, it will give us 0. So the condition is true. But we know that 0 is not an even number, and it is also not an odd number. A 0 is basically 0. How can we include a statement that says if number is equal to 0, the number should display 0 is a 0? There are several ways to do this. One of it is by using multiple selection. In multiple selection, the syntax is similar to what we have seen previously, but we have if-else within the else. Here it shows that we have if Boolean expression 1 and then statement 1, else if Boolean expression 2, statement 2, and it will keep on going as many if-else as we need. It can be a bit confusing to know the flow when you have several if-else within the if-else. Remember that each of the else is associated with the most recent incomplete if. Instead of using if-else, you can also use multiple if statements in place of using if-else statements. That means you would have if expression 1, and then the next one you have if expression 2. It really depends on what you want your program to do. When you have multiple selection, it may take longer to evaluate as it has to check each of your if-else within your if-else. From the same question earlier, we can modify our code to have multiple selection and include 0 to have its own if statement. You need to be careful of where you place it as it could give different result than expected. You need to think of the flow of your program. For example, do you want to check if the number entered is 0 first, or do you want to do the modulus and check the remainder first, then only check if the user entered the number 0? There are several ways that we can take to have the same result. this code over here, we have if number equal to 0 as the first statement. If the number entered is not 0, it will go to the else part. Within the else, we have another if statement to check if the number modulus 2 is equal to 0, meaning that if it has the remainder of 0, it is an even number. Otherwise, it goes to the else and it is an odd number. Over here, you can see that the second if-else is within the else. If you have braces, be really careful as it needs to be in pair, otherwise you will have an error when compiling. For beginners, it might be a good idea to write a comment as shown in this code here to know exactly which braces belongs to which if or which else. Also, to make it easier to read through the code, use tabs or spaces to separate the outer if-else and the inner if-else. If you have more if-else, tap it at each pair so that you know which else belongs to which if. Remember that as we mentioned earlier, the last else that we have would belong to the latest if. We can also choose not to have the braces as we only have one statement at each if and also at each else. It makes your code seem shorter as it has less lines now. Both give the same result. How else do you think we can modify our code to check if the number is 0? We can write our code like this where we have two expressions in the if. Here we use the AND operator. In the first if, it checks if the number entered has the remainder of 0 and also if the number is not equal to 0. If that is true, it will print out the number is an even number. Otherwise, it will go to the else part. Inside the else, it checks again if the number is equal to 0. If that is true, it will display number is a 0 number. Otherwise, it must be an odd number, so it will display number is an odd number. We can use different expressions to refer to the same thing. For example, instead of using number modulus 2 equal to 0, we can use number modulus 2 equal to 1, and we can change the display to be number is an odd number. You can also use number modulus 2 not equal to 0. That is exactly the same thing as number modulus 2 equal to 1. Let's look at another example. Here it shows that you have a number entered by the user in the variable called a, and depending on the condition, it will execute the statement accordingly. As each if and else has two statements, it needs to have the braces, otherwise it will get a compilation error. From this code, we can see that if the user enters 15, it first checks, is 15 larger or equal to 1? That is true, so it will ignore the rest of the code and goes straight to the statements within the first if, which will display the number you enter is 15, you enter the positive number. If the user enters minus 15, it checks the first condition in the if. Is minus 15 larger than 1? That condition becomes false, so it skips the if statements and go to the else. As there is another if within the else, it checks again. Is minus 15 less than 0? The condition is true, so it executes the statements within the second if and ignore the rest. It will display the number you enter is minus 15. You enter the negative number. What if the user enters 0? Similar steps as before, it checks the first if. Is 0 larger or equal to 1? It becomes false. It goes to the else part and checks the second if. Is 0 less than 0? That is also false, so it goes to the next else. And within the last else, it has another if. It checks. If 0 equal to 0, that is true, so it executes the statements there and displays the number you enter is 0. You enter the 0 number. Let's look at another example of multiple selection. Here we have the test score and the grade. You might want to use multiple if-else in this type of question when you have ranges of numbers. Before writing the code, you might want to understand the flow first. Should you start off with the lowest score range and more upwards, or going from larger range and move downwards? Both works depending on how you write your code. In this code here, it starts from the top to bottom, so it first checks if the score entered, is it larger than 90? If it is not larger or equal to 90, it can be any number ranging from 0 to 89. So, in the else, we can have another if that checks the range from 80 to 89, because if it is 90, it will pass the first if and will never goes down to the else. If the score is not within 80 to 90, it goes to the else and do another checking in the if for the range of 70 to 79. It keeps on checking through else and if until score larger or equal to 60, which is the range of 60 to 69. Do we need another if within the last else? We don't need it because we don't care about the range anymore. In the last else, it basically is the default for any value that do not satisfy the conditions of the multiple if-else. How should we change our code if we want to check from F to A? In the previous code, we check from A to F. Let's go through this code. We start off with score less than 60. Then, when we write if score is less than 70, that is the range of 60 to 69. In the next else, and if the range is between 70 to 79, then 80 to 89, and in the last else, that is basically any number larger than or equal to 90. However, both of these codes have a logical error. What happens if the score entered is 500? It will display your grade is A. What happens if the score entered is minus 100? It will display your grade is F. So, how should we overcome the problem? We can add another expression to limit the maximum or minimum values using the AND operator, but it needs to be done at each of the expression. See here that at the last if, when we don't have an else, we can have multiple selection and end with if. It does not matter because we only care about the values from 0 to 100. Say that we only have the AND operator at the first if. Does this solve the problem of score equal to minus 100? It doesn't, because in the first if, it checks minus 100 is less than 60, which is true. But when it checks minus 100 larger than 0, it becomes false. So true and false become false. It will go to the else part. Within the else, we have another if. It checks, is minus 100 less than 70? That becomes true. So it will display your grade is D, even though we know that minus 100 is an invalid number. That's why we need to write the operator AND and also score larger than 0 at each of if statements that we have in this code. Instead of using multiple if-else, we can rewrite the code to only use if statements. This will also give the same result. We combine two expressions as the conditions to have the correct range. For example, if mark larger and equal to 90 and mark less than or equal to 100, this is the range of 90 to 100. If we can use only if statements, why do we need if-else? We can use multiple if-else to deal with unexpected value or result. Let's go back to the code where the user can enter values larger than 100 and smaller than 0. In multiple if-else, we can use the last else to deal with other unexpected values. For example, maybe displaying a message that says invalid score. This is more useful than nothing is displayed on the screen when the user enters minus 100. What we have done so far is multiple selection, where we have our if within the else. We can also have our if within if instead of having our if within the else. This is called as a nested if. That means When the condition is true, it will check another condition of another if before it proceeds with any statement. Let's look at this example code. In the first if, it checks if the test score is larger or equal to 70. If this is true, it will go to the next line and executes another if statement. If this is false, it will go straight to the else part and display you did not pass. Say that the test score is larger than 70. It goes to the next if and checks if the student age is less than 10. If this is true, it will display you did a great job. Otherwise, if the student age is larger or equal to 10, it will display you did pass. The sentence you did pass needs to have the first expression as true, but the second if as false. So that means test score is larger or equal to 70, but age should be larger or equal to 10. When it displays you did a great job, that means the test score is larger or equal to 70, that should be true, and also student age is less than 10 should be true as well. What if we want to represent this code differently? How can we do it? We can write it differently to achieve the same result. For example, we can write if test score is larger or equal to 70 and student age is less than 10, it will display you did a great job. Over here, we use the AND operator. If those conditions are false, it will go to the else. And within the else, it means that either test score is less than 70 or the student age is larger or equal to 10. So within the else, we can have another if else, where inside the if, we can check if test score is larger or equal to 70, it will display you did pass. Writing a proper if control. These two samples shows that how the same task can be implemented in very different ways. You can see that we can make our multiple if-else very complicated when we don't have to. So, when you write your if-else or your multiple if-else, make sure that you know the flow of it before you write the code. Let's look at these two codes A and B. Are they different? From here, we can see that it is important that we know that indentation is not sufficient to determine the nesting of if statements. The compiler will always match the else with the nearest if. So, make sure that you really understand the concept of multiple if-else so that you know which else belongs to which if. In this case, we can see that A is exactly the same as B. We can also use braces to make it more easily to see which else belongs to which if. How about this one? Is A and B the same or is it different? Here, A and B are different. This is because in A, we have the braces within the first if, meaning that the second if is within the first if. In B, we don't have the braces, that means that the last else belongs to the latest if, while in A, the else belongs to the first if. Try and run the code to really understand the concept of if-else, multiple if-else, and the use of braces. To summarize, in this part we have looked at examples of multiple statements where we have if-else within the else and also nested if statements where we have if or if-else statements within the if.